So I'm talking today about the paradox of individuality, when I becomes we. I've got a couple of cartoons to show you which you'll get the idea. Which one of us is me? Think about your experience of entering a group. Whilst I might seek in a group a certain commonality, I'm looking for people who are of like mind, of similar character to myself. When we join any group, that's really what we're looking for, how we connect with people, what it is that makes me feel at home. But the flip side of it is that to feel really part of a group, you have to know that your individuality is accepted. You have to know that the way in which you stand out, the way in which you are different from others, will be welcomed just as much as the similarity is. And indeed, if I find myself wandering into a group where everybody seems homogeneous and it's the same, I begin to feel insecure about my differences. And I feel the need to withdraw because I sense that my difference is not accepted. So it just shows you one of the challenges we have with groups, that we enter a group seeking something in common, yet we know that there is something that is not in common, which if I am unable to share, I feel less inclined to join. I want to look at it a slightly different way though as well. When we speak about this idea of love, when we define what love is, we realize that love requires other. I'll show you what I mean. So this is from my book, Paradoxes of Group Life, which I've quoted many times before, so this year. And it says this: only as the infant builds a sense of self that is distinct from mother can it develop a relationship with mother. We've explored this idea before. The sense of difference, of separateness, of individuality is actually required for a relationship to be established. When we talk about the Lord, when we talk about the Lord's divine love, Emanuel Swedenborg writes this: in regard to God, loving and being loved in return are not possible in the case of others who have some share of infinity or anything of the essence and life of intrinsic love or of divinity. If there were within them any share of infinity or anything of the essence and life of intrinsic love, of divinity that is, it would not be others who would be loving God. He would be loving himself. You see, for God to love, he must love something that is other than himself. If that other thing contains infinity, it contains divinity, it contains God, and he would therefore be loving himself. It requires other, and that's us. That's us. Jesus, in his teachings in the world, said this: if you love those who love you, what reward have you? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet your brethren only, what do you do more than others? Do not even the tax collectors do so? Therefore you shall be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect. Any real love, any real relationship requires other. It requires difference from me. Otherwise, I am loving that person based on what is the same as them within me, and that's actually just a form of loving myself. So back to my book, Paradoxes of Group Life. And they say this: the group gains its solidarity as individuality is legitimated, and individuality is established when the primacy of the group is affirmed. There's a paradoxical relationship between belonging to a group and being an individual, and we sense that as we go through the motions of becoming part of a group. Okay, the next cartoon I'm going to show you is a political one. However, I don't want you to get hung up on the fact that it's political. I am not making a political statement. I'm going to be observing about it. But I wonder whether you've seen this cartoon. Has anybody seen it? I gather not. Populism for Dummies. And so you have a characterisation of those on the left wing of politics as an us group, and those on the right wing of politics as a me group. As I looked at that cartoon and pondered it, though, I realised a couple of things about this picture. You see, there's a certain usness about the me group. There's an usness about the me group. You can see it in the sense that here are a group of people involved in political action together about a cause for which they feel is important. But when you look more deeply, you realise also, when you speak to these people who are on this side, in this right-wing group, you realise actually they're standing for something which is important. And as I speak to my friends who are on the right wing of politics, I hear them say the value of things like freedom of speech and freedom of action. And that is something they value not just for me, but for us. Do you see? So there is an usness about this me group. There's also a certain me-ness about the us group. They're united in action in opposing the me's, but that's actually based on a sense of their own me as being not me. Do you see? So one of the things I realise is that, you know, it's very easy to characterise, well, people on the left wing of politics are all very community focused and community centred. People on the right wing of politics are all very self-centred. But it's just not true. It's just not true. It doesn't stand up. And then I realise as well, there are actually things the two groups share. I wonder if you can see them. Look at the two people right at the very front of each group as we look at it. Look at the way the lady on the left and the man on the right are looking at each other. And what they share is a disdain for one another. And that disdain unites them. The other thing to realise is that were you to take one of these groups in isolation and look at them as a group, you would actually find the same divisions occurring within that group. So whilst it plays out here in politics in some sense, it's actually reflecting the experience we have of living in groups. And this is what, going back to my book, Paradoxes of Group Life, this is what this reflects. So it's talking about groups, it's not talking about politics. On one side, we find expressions of the collective good, the call for a commitment to a common goal, the need for self-sacrifice, social conformity, and compromises of the social contract. On the other side, we find the virtues of individuality, creativity, freedom of expression, and the stimulation and growth from which all human progress is sculpted. Now that statement was written in the mid-1980s. This cartoon comes from last year. And I find it really fascinating that we have played out in politics group dynamics. And it doesn't matter what size of group we're talking about, these two sides continue to appear. So as I say, you could take the right side of politics or the left side of politics and you could look at that group in isolation and those two sides would still appear. And then you subdivide those groups and you look at the groups in a smaller level and those two sides still appear. One of the problems we face in any group is a creation of enemies and friends. We have a tendency as human beings to see other as dangerous, as something to be avoided. Yet, as I said before at the start, when we come into a group, we want to know that our otherness, our individuality is welcomed and accepted into that group to really feel part of that group. I remember at high school, my music teacher was teaching us about Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. You know, that opening da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. And he was talking about the way that the BBC used that at the start of their propaganda broadcasts during World War II. And he called it Fate Knocking on the Door. And he made the comment that England had never been, Britain, sorry, it was in Scotland. He made the comment that Britain had never been so united as when it faced a common enemy. A common enemy can be a powerful uniting force that brings a group together. But one of the reasons that it does that is it distracts us from the otherness in our own ranks. We locate otherness out there and we make that the problem. And we all focus our energy and our efforts against that, and it distracts us from the otherness within. But what happens when we start to lose sight of that enemy, that common enemy? What happens when the common enemy is defeated or disappears? We start to notice the otherness within and we start to feel less secure within the group. We start to feel there's an enemy lurking inside, there's a danger inside that we need to get rid of, and we find another common enemy but within the group this time and we push them out. It's very easy for us to see an enemy in terms of what is not me. But we're confusing ourselves when we do that. When we do that, we're taking on the attitude that everything about me is good and true, and everything about the enemy is evil and false. And so in order to get rid of evil and falsity, we get rid of the enemy. And then everything's rosy again. But what happens? Once the enemy's gone, we find another one. And the same process happens over and over again. We have to realise that goodness and truth comes from the Lord, and we only have it in the amount that we respond to the Lord. So therefore we also have what is evil and false, which does not respond to the Lord, within us. And it is that must be the enemy. What is within, not what is located outside in others. A couple of passages from the Word. Jesus taught, "Why do you call me good? No one is good but one, that is God." Good and truth come from the Lord, and the Lord alone. Even Jesus said that. The passage that Carl read to us this morning about King Ahab, the prophet Elijah. Do you remember Ahab's words to Elijah? "Is that you, O troubler of Israel?" Ahab saw Elijah as the problem. Was Elijah the problem? No, Ahab was the problem. It was Ahab and the practices Ahab had instituted that was the problem, but he was unable to see it. He saw Elijah as the problem because Elijah was the one bringing the bad news all the time. And yet Elijah, the prophet, represents the divine truth. He represents the Word active in our lives. Yes, it tells us some dreadfully bad news at times, but the reason is because we are the problem. It's our problem that we need to solve. And I just wanted to pick on one phrase that I mentioned in the reading that I brought from Matthew 10. A man's enemies will be those of his own household. The Lord is quoting the book of Micah, the prophet, chapter 6. A man's enemies will be those of his own household. And that is our reality. Our enemies are what is within. It's not other people. So we have this tendency to attribute evil and falsity out there and locate goodness and truth within, but that is not the true picture. And Swedenborg's work reminds us of this. Particularly where he talks about charity, about love of the neighbour. He reminds us that the greatest expression of love I can offer is to someone who is different from me. It's very easy for us in this group to show love to one another because we share a common bond. We share a respect for the Word. We share Swedenborg's writings and an understanding of the world from Swedenborg's spiritual work. So it becomes easy for us to share our love for one another. Much less easy to share love with someone who doesn't have the same attitude to life as we do. And yet doing that is the truest expression of love. Because we recognise other in someone. It also reminds me that it's possible for differences of opinion to be genuine in the sense of the motivation behind them. We can do what we do for the benefit of this group, and we can hold differences of opinion and hold them strongly because of our motivation for the benefits of this group. And how easy it is to look at another person who has a different perspective on things and say, no, you're wrong, you're going to destroy this group and, make it weak and so on and so forth. That's our problem to deal with. And Swedenborg's work reminds me to step beyond externals. To recognise when I do that, locating evil in someone else and persecuting them because I see them as evil, I need to stop and realise, hang on, the evil is within. This evil is the one that I ought to fight. And together we defeat evil when we fight the evils that exist within. It occurred to me this morning as we were driving here, what's the difference between natural life and life in the heavens? Is it that there are different people here and there won't be different people there? No, that's not the case. Swedenborg talks about the grand man and the way it's made up of all these different societies. And they're all different, they all play their different roles. The difference is, in the heavens, there's no enemy. There's no enemy. There are other, but there's no enemy. So, my challenge for the week. Just before Jesus told the parable of the Good Samaritan, the man who stimulated this approached Jesus and said, "Who is my neighbour? Who is it that I am to love?" And Jesus told the parable of the Good Samaritan, the Samaritan who is the outcast. This pairing of words, good and Samaritan, in the Jewish mind didn't belong together. Go find the person you disagree with. Go find the person who holds an opinion different from your own. Go find the person who lives in a way that is different from you and has a different expression of life, and show them love. And notice your own reactions as you do it. Notice whether you're able to do it indeed. Are you able to show love to other? Realise that their need for love from you is just as strong as your own need for love from them.